lunch, you need 2 hours to pass out, like food coma.
Yeah.
After
And it makes sense. Like when you go to Rajasthan, if you ever live in Rajasthan, you understand why their diet is such. It makes sense
it's
for
very
the
arid,
temperament.
and people used to walk a lot. Like my grandfather himself, when he was
Yeah.
young, he used to walk camels, and like he used to have passengers used to give him 20 peso for like several kilometers on a camel ride. So people used to eat like heavy things, which included a lot of fats because they needed those fats to be digested throughout the rest of the day. Like
Yeah.
now, you're not supposed to technically just eat dal bari and like sleep for 3 hours, but
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, in cities, so it's not
And
They're
really
very
lifestyle used to
sedentary.
be very different back in India in those days and the way it is now, where everybody has washing machines and dishwashers and kambalis and all of those things have really shifted too.
I
Anyway,
remember when my mom was newly married, my dad like had 15 different friends groups. And, like each one of those would show up for like snacks or lunch or dinner at our like house in Rajasthan every day. So she and then that this was continued to happen like even when I was a few months old. So she had to like handle me and then do all of this work in the house with like not that much help, and she was able to do all of it because it was a different lifestyle. But now it's just not possible for her or for anyone else to do that.
yeah, awesome.
All
Cool.
right. So we are live. And that was actually a perfect kind of segue into this conversation because we were talking about how dal bati is perfectly the food that exists in Rajasthan and it's there for a particular reason because it helps in the lifestyle of the Rajasthanis, right? And so I want to talk about how this India, how everything is so like planned out, you know, like everything was thought about, everything has a particular reason that we do, you know, in Ayurveda, the Deepika is the kind of the specialist here. And then we have Vivek in various different specialties. I can't even name one, but I know one of the one that he's been kind of, I've seen a lot about him on Instagram and a lot of his posts on Instagram about human rights and human right activism and protecting that. So he's sharing a lot. So we're going to talk about all of that in this in this episode of Indian Pride. It's also a Thanksgiving episode. So everybody in the audience, please let me know how your Thanksgiving was. What did you all do to be grateful? How did you all show that? Is there something, maybe you donated a little bit of money, maybe you went out and helped people. There's a lot of homeless people in LA or wherever you're at, and maybe you're kind of helping them out, or whatever you did to show that you're grateful for today and grateful for your life. Because hey, people in the US, we live in the best country in the world, and of course people that are in India, the blessed, the most spiritual, and I feel like we have everything on our side in India. So this show is bridging those two, sides. We have this Indian side of us and we have this American side of us, especially the people who are here, who've been living here for the last 15, 20, 30 years. So really quickly, I want to introduce myself. I'm your host, Dr. Varun Gandhi, Love and Abundance. This is the sign language, American Sign Language for love. So I just kind of throw that up every time I start anything. Thank you everybody for joining. This is What's Your Story? And this show is an exploration of our world. We talk about issues pertaining to the Indian community. And these issues are not only limited to us because they're shared across many different communities. And the question is, how can we move the needle on these issues? We have a lot of things to talk about. We have a lot of different issues that are within our community. And how can we move the needle? The one answer I had was through conversations, by talking about it, by bringing experts on kind of on a show like this. And hey, let's learn from them. Let's reach out to people who don't look like us and have these uncomfortable conversations. We hear that this is the land of the free, but I feel like we don't really have freedom because we are bound by hate, we're bound by shame, abuse, rejection, and we're bound by all of these differences between us. And these are the issues that we're talking about in What's Your Story? It's a little history. So far, this is the 10th episode. And we've covered different topics such as mental health, colorism, the cultural appropriation of yoga, women's abuse. The last episode was on men's abuse within the Indian community all across the world. In each of these 10 episodes, or at least the past 9 episodes, we've had panelists from all over the world. For our mental health panel, we had the CEO of the Chopra Foundation, Punacha, who's based out of LA and works closely with Deepak Chopra. Some of our other guests have included Kavita, who's based out of India, and she is the founder of the Dark is Beautiful movement. And we had Renu Dhillon, who is a powerful advocate for women's empowerment, stemming from her experiences with an abusive husband. Thus far, our panelists have spanned across 3 continents, Asia, Australia, and North America. I'm sure we will soon include panelists from South America, Africa, Europe, and maybe throw in a penguin from Antarctica. So we cover a variety of perspectives in each discussion as we reach an international audience. And our episodes thus far have been watched by more than 50,000 people worldwide. The upcoming topics, the next topic for December, initially I was thinking of period shaming, but I kind of want to move that topic to January. And instead, I feel like December is a month of giving. And I want to bring on CEOs of different nonprofits to talk about their journey of starting a nonprofit, what brought them there, how they went about it, everything around it, and share their stories. So that's what we're going to do in 2 weeks, December 17th. All right, a little bit about me. Who am I? I have a background in science. I'm a researcher, and I've published several scientific articles in top environmental and engineering journals. This was my previous life, though. I was an environmental engineering consultant, but I realized I wasn't making much of an impact. You know, the water quality in America is already so great, so maybe my impact may have been like that 0.2%, if that. And so I felt like I didn't really want to do that anymore. And that's where I began exploring the non-traditional career paths. I became interested in storytelling. I read a lot about stories. I realized stories are how we form an understanding of our world. Stories drive our perspectives. So the story that we create, or the stories that are fed to us, determine the course of our lives. And that's a kind of a theory that I've had, a hypothesis that I had, right? And what do I mean by stories when I say that? When you think about life, right, I look at it as a series of stories that we tell ourselves, meaning every experience that we go through, we make meaning out of it, and we put in our own meaning, which is our own story behind these real life experiences. So in essence, we're coloring the picture using the tools from our kit. But okay, that's a whole bunch of words. So what do I mean by that? All right, let me kind of give you a little example. So this is the month of December, and many companies are going to have corporate parties. You know, unfortunately, COVID times, maybe that's not possible. But let me remind you of what you're going to be missing out in December: the corporate parties, right? So let's imagine we're like at a bowling event, and it's dark, and people are enjoying, having fun, they're drinking, and suddenly you bump into a coworker. And now this coworker and you've had some sort of tension in the past. So immediately in your mind, you have had that tension. So immediately in your mind, you go back to those incidences and you create this anger that comes up inside of you. You associate all of those incidences with this person. And when you see this person, they bump into you and they drop some alcohol on your shirt. And now all of this anger just comes up and you explode. But when in fact, maybe what happened was it was an accidental bump. But because of the stories, because you colored the story a certain way, you created that anger and you exploded onto that person. So we create stories constantly. And that's what this conversation is going to be about. We're going to focus on Indian pride. So why did I choose this topic? I moved here first in 2001. And when I first moved here, I didn't really feel comfortable sharing my Indianness. And I moved here from Dubai, where I was surrounded by Indians. I was in a school surrounded by Indians, and I did everything. It was like Little India, just in Dubai. And when I moved here to America, I didn't see many people around me that were like me. Right? I moved into Kennesaw, which was predominantly white. And then over the time, you talk to women, and they're turned off by it. You bring out this Indianness, and they're like turned off by it. So you do all you can to look different, to feel different, to fit in, to do what's cool, what's popular, which at that time, when I was 15, it wasn't being Indian. So for a while, I became a closet Indian, right? I would go in behind closed doors, enjoy with family and friends, but then I wouldn't go out there and talk about it. I'd just be Indian behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. And all this happened until a few years ago, when I started enjoying Garba. I started enjoying our music and just being part of it and attending these events. And then that quickly escalated to organizing 2,000 Gujarati folks in LA over the last few years. So in this episode, we're focused on sharing personal stories of what makes our panelists proud of being Indian through various different lenses, if you want to call it, right? So at this point, I want to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Deepika. Deepika is an Ayurvedic healer, a yoga therapist, a teacher, and the host of the Mindful Gupshup podcast. Deepika looks forward to serving the community and considers it her mission to reach out to others and inspire them. She is moved by the relationship between humans and humanity, and it's her own personal journey that sparked something within her to go out and make a difference. Welcome, Deepika. Can you share some of your personal journey, like some stories that inspired you to make a difference? Because honestly, it takes a special kind of person to do that.
Thank you. I would say that I'm still in the process of trying to inspire, not quite there yet. And I'm not trying to play the humble card. I just think it's a process. It really genuinely is a process. Going back to your question about how did my journey start, I think a lot of it goes into just being a woman. And particularly the culture that I come from. I think before we started the broadcast, I shared with Vivek that I'm also Marwari Rajput. And so just in that, Vivek probably understands the full scope of what that means being a woman. And for the audience tuning in and listening, that means a lot of restrictions, very conservative family, constantly being compared to by the other sex in the family, meaning the male in the family and things like that. And so I just experienced a lot growing up in India, seeing the dichotomy, seeing the differences in how women were treated, both in a good way and in not so kind way. And same thing for men as well, that men also faced a lot of pressure because they were men, not because they were whatever their capacities were. And so my journey really began just, I would say, after I came to America and just completely being like, literally like, a plant getting uprooted from its original setting in the ground to being all of a sudden dropped into New Jersey and not knowing how to speak English, not knowing anything about what living in America would really mean, and just really trying to survive. As my parents worked multiple jobs, I started taking care of my sister and started taking care of the household, which is not atypical for an Indian family, especially immigrant family. And so I would say there are a couple of different things that happened throughout my life, things that I've witnessed. And one particular incident that I'm very comfortable sharing is I witnessed 9/11. I happened to be across the river because I had an interview for a job at Pfizer, blah, 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 all of that. And so that moment, particularly for me, really shifted deep something inside of me. And I don't want to create a traumatizing talk here, but it was very, very, it created this deep impact where here I was, a young student looking for an internship, blah, blah, blah. And I witnessed something that really did divide the country. It did create a polarization. And then I began to also feel things, not because I was an immigrant, but because of the color of my skin and because of who I was in that moment and what I witnessed. And so, moving 10 years into it, it really, as I started shifting and experiencing life in my mid 20s and late 20s and things like that, all of those non-existential questions really began to ask something of me that was deeper than, getting the 6-figure job. It's like done, getting the nice car, done, getting a house, done. Like I had checked all the boxes and it was like still something inside of me that wasn't quite satiated. And I kind of felt as a woman still ripped between two cultures of when I'm at home, I'm this, Indian beti, and then when I go outside, I have to assimilate, right? You have to assimilate to where you are by the environment that you're in. And so it's hard for me still, these many years into being an Ayurvedic healer and all of that, it's still hard for me to really pinpoint and say, this moment really shifted me and it drove me to become an Ayurvedic doctor. And it drove me to do this and this and this, because it's not one particular thing. It's been little things that have added up that has brought me to where I am today.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story. That 9/11, that was 2 months before I'd moved to America. So I moved here in July 2001, and 9/11 was right after. So yeah, that was,
you got dropped in.
Yeah, that was like, what is going on? I remember that moment. I was in class, and we were in a computer class, and we saw it on TV, and then they shut it off, and the teacher was like, just everything's cool, just calm down, everything's good. But then we started freaking out because people were like, internet. It was a computer class. Everyone was in front of computers, and they could just look it up real quickly. That was a crazy time. 2000.
Yeah. I think it really shifted, when you witness things like that, it really creates something, a ripple effect of a sort, to put it lightly. But I mean, that moment for me particularly, really paused me in my early 20s, because it was in my early 20s where I was just like, not to sound it was just like, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of life?
Yeah. No, I mean that those little things, like that's what it is. Little shifts that happen over time.
Yeah, it propels.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for sharing, Deepika. Welcome. And our next panelist is Vivek Jain Sangvi, or Vivek Sangvi Jain. So Vivek,
either or, like
it goes either. Okay. So Vivek works as a machine learning engineer at CalBox DTX. He graduated with a computer engineering degree from Mumbai University, and then with a master's degree in computer science from the Southern Methodist University. He recently moved back to his hometown, Mumbai, India. Outside of work, so he was in Dallas before, and now he moved back to Mumbai. And outside of work, his passions lie in philosophy, theology, food chemistry, dancing, education, technology, veganism, and human rights activism. Welcome, Vivek. And can you share kind of your journey of how you became to be so passionate about human rights activist issues? Because I feel like it's not for everyone, and not everyone is interested in talking about these issues. So, it's again, like I mentioned earlier, it takes a special kind of person to do this. So welcome, Vivek, and please share your stories.
Thank you for having me here. Human rights activism was not something like the words human rights activism weren't something that I had actually thought about up until we were having a conversation about a description. And I was like, wait, what exactly is the activism that I'm doing? Like, how exactly would I categorize it? And I was thinking of, for me, every life is important. But then, the statement "all lives matter" has a very different political context. So I just wanted to leave that out. So animals, like, I fight for, and I'm pro veganism as much as I can. Like, I try to include as much of it as I possibly can in my diet, in my lifestyle, in my choices, even in my investment choices. Similarly, because I believe that every life matters, um, I it was important to me to talk about things that a lot of people are not talking about. And then I realized that enough people are talking about the things that are happening in the West, whether it's, the rise of anti-Semitism, or Islamophobia, or just, any and all kinds of like hatred and polarization that we have been witnessing over the last 5 6 years, especially more so in the US, but even the West in general, and it's now a lot more in Europe as well. But I grew up like till 2014, 2015 in India, but I witnessed a lot of terrorist attacks from like the years 2004 to 2009. With 2008, the 2611, it's so sad to say this, but the 9/11 equivalent of India, like we
Yeah.
had so many of those that over time we were just conditioned um, towards, there's a terrorist attack and 300 people have died, and then it doesn't bother you anymore. Now, like looking back at those days, I'm like, those headlines, they just fall on deaf ears after time, because this becomes normalized. Like you hear there's an explosion in Venice, and you're like, whoa, like what happened? But if you hear there was an explosion in Baghdad, then you're like, well, explosions happen very frequently in Baghdad. Um, that is kind of what happened with me as well over time. And then I saw how like certain sections of the media, along with a lot of politicians, were very intentionally causing misinformation to not offend some of their voter bases. Who somehow thought that attacking these miscreants and labeling them as these radicals, these terrorists, who for a very particular goal were trying to do these things. Um, a certain group of people thought that, this attack by people who wanted to talk about these things is against them. So politicians, to appease those people, went in an overdrive to just not have any of these conversations. And then like over a decade, we couldn't talk about, or we couldn't even call them out. And then I realized that, if over time this continues to happen and happen and happen, then the first guy who talks about it is put on a pedestal. Like, and I'm not going to name him, but the first guy who calls them out, calls out a spade for a spade, even in spite of like a billion other faults. People who are desperate for a sense of security, who want someone to talk about the pain that they're having and not just be invalidated and trivialized, they lynch onto that hope. So I just wanted to talk about any and all wrongs that I see, because like to me, all sentient life, even if it's an ant in a grass, or like someone over here, or if it's, some poor like person in Pakistan, and like any on all of those things that you see in my Instagram stories in between memes and videos and food. So that's
Yeah.
basically me. I feel the
And
need to talk,
I think,
voice the unheard.
I think Jainism has a role to play in that, right?
Jainism has a very strong role to play in that, and it wasn't so up until like 2016. Up until 2015, it was only like this activism was because I saw a lot of loss of life, like not personal, but some of these attacks happened within a 3 mile, 5 mile radius of me.
Yeah.
So over time, like I started looking at those, but then 2015 is when I moved to the US. And then I started having a lot of conversations with people in theology, and that has always been an interest to me. Like it sounded very funny to me that growing up in India, we call like stories of Ram, Krishna, and all these things mythology. And then the other things become theology, like the study of religion and history. But like Ram and Krishna and Ram Setu, which is somehow called by Wikipedia as Adam's Bridge, is all like different, right? It's called myth. So I started looking into these things, and the reason why I had to start looking into it was because I constantly met a lot of people who were very proud about their religion and were inviting me to
Mm-hmm.
churches and sermons, and you constantly meet those people, and I would go with them. Like I would have lunch with them, I would have dinners with them. It was very interesting to hear it from them, because these conversations with, again, like a lot of like different sects of Christians and Catholics, you cannot have it that openly in India without worrying about offending people. But because I was making a fresh start, A, I didn't have to worry about it. And B, the people who I met were very open to these conversations because these like things were happening in the university. So people over there had to be like respectful towards your choices, while at the same time, like if they're inviting you to tell them that why their version is better, they have to start with grace and kindness and niceties. So that made me realize a lot of things that I don't know much about my own faith, my own theology, like what is exactly the version of truth that I believe in. You know, Jainism is a very distinct version of truth. Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, Buddhism, they all have very distinct, they do have a lot of commonalities, but there's also a lot of distinct versions. So what exactly is it that you follow when you grow up in India, right? It's just, you know, big khichdi, and not in a bad way. Like everything's
Yeah.
very open and flexible. And again, I think that's beautiful. But so after that, when I came back, my Masi is a Gyanshala instructor. She teaches Jainism to a lot of kids in Cochin, in Kerala. There's like very few families over there. So I spent 10 days with her, and she's one of the most positive people on the planet. Just
Life.
Yeah, no, that's,
Life. I love that.
yeah.
It's okay, Vivek.
Wait, hold on, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, my Masi is an expert in Jainism, and she teaches Jainism over there. So I spent a few days with her, and I was very pessimistic about a lot of things. I had a very different take on life, and she told me, like, she taught me what karma theory is in deep, and like what exactly does Jain theology say. Like the two things that I took from it was that everything that happens, you know, with you is all because of karma. The good things will happen to you if you put out good in the world. And there's very different versions of it. There's things that are indirect, there's things that are direct, there's things that, you know, are intentional. What is your intention behind doing something, even if something ends up being bad? And then there are things that are like, even the bad things that are happening to you can be because of karma. And then my question to that was, isn't that like victim blaming 101? And then, because again, there's like different kinds of bad things, and like not a lot of bad things have happened to me, but I didn't want to trivialize what happened to a lot of people by saying that, hey, this was because things that you did. So I was like, okay, how exactly do I not do victim blaming? Because again, I grew up and like my education was very left leaning, which I really appreciate because it allows you to talk about these things in a more direct way that than more than like Indian conservatism allows. So then I had deeper conversations, and then I realized it's not necessarily victim blaming. Then I started. I also attended a Bhakti yoga club again for food. Food is a great uniter. Like food, and we would have yoga, and we would have deep discussions on
Yeah.
like Sanatana Dharma and like what exactly Krishna said, or what like ISKCON says that their version is. And it was phenomenal, just the conversations I was able to have with them and like have like theological discussions. And that allowed me some more clarity in what exactly I believe in. And just, you know, a sense of pride because our culture and our history is thousands of years old. And like we're still very accepting. There's a lot of things that we need to fix. Yes, that should always be something that, you know, we come in a conversation with. Anikantwad is like the primary philosophy of Jainism, followed by ahimsa. Like I need to enter a conversation with the mindset that I am not 100% correct, that I may know only partial truth, that my version of truth can be unique to me, and then I need to be respectful and mindful of the others around me. Like sometimes I go in monologues, I don't let them talk that much, but I need to be aware of that to when I start a conversation, and that allowed me to partake in these theological discussions with other people and their beliefs and respect them for having their beliefs, as long as again their beliefs are not directly harming me or others that I know of. And I like then later found it a little difficult as well, because, you know, once you start all this activism, especially like when you have a lot of vegan friends, you start feeling a lot more pain. And like I've always been a little more empathetic towards everyone. Like that allowed me to become really good friends with a lot of people, even after moving to US instantly, which I'm really thankful for. Again, for your Thanksgiving, I'm really thankful for all of that. But you know, you start seeing, because of the empathy, you start seeing the pain that people are feeling, you know, whether it's online or whether it's like in your immediate circles. And then, you know, it's good to talk about them and let other people know about these things, because sometimes you get one response that, hey, thank you for like letting me know this. I had absolutely no idea that this was happening. Like I had a brief talk about Winston Churchill and the things that he did
Mm-hmm.
um, during the Bengal famine in India,
Mm-hmm.
and especially the things that British did in general. But Winston Churchill and some direct quotes from him, because he's considered as some sort of like war god who helped
Right.
lead the Allies and defeat fascism while he himself was imposing the same policies and killing like millions of Indians by just starving them intentionally.
Right.
So when I told this to a lot of my white friends, they were like, "We had no idea because we were taught that Winston Churchill was a strategist. He
Right.
was this guru
Yeah,
of like strategies." So I'm glad that
incredible.
talking about things have had some really positive reactions, and sometimes like these things can be very like polarizing because especially if I pick things from scriptures and then people start with, there's a context with everything, and I'm like, yes, I'm all ready to talk about it, but I don't want to offend someone or make someone start questioning their entire like existence and faith by just invalidating it because my questions make them think about these things themselves. And it was funny because there was this one guy from like a Christian institution at SMU who used to eat lunch with us, and he couldn't answer like most of my questions and one of my roommates questions. And at the end of that year he ended up joining seminary school, which I realized is,
Wow.
again, good for him because he realized that he didn't have the fundamentals and the theologies right to be able to answer questions of other people that he was trying to bring into the fold of like the version of Christianity that he practiced. So he thought that it was important for him to go to seminary school, which again, I'm happy that that discussion happened. I think that was very fruitful for him to realize that if this is something that he wants to like dedicate his life to in the service of the
Right.
Lord, then he really needs to know how to respond to basic questions rather than simply answering things with we have to take it with faith.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just, I mean, right now it's also, there's a lot of, fake news. There's a lot of just stuff that's floating around the internet that people read the headlines on Facebook and
Yeah.
they just take it to be true, but they don't look into the background of it. They don't, dig deeper and find out what's the real truth and what's been going on.
Inquiry.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think I think that's like the main overarching thing that I heard from you, Vivek, is number one is always entering into a situation and conversation or discussion or whatever it is with the understanding that this is your perspective and remaining open to other people's perspective. And then the second thing is also the inquiry. And I think this is where I didn't read the entire message, but they talked about the appropriation of yoga and Ayurveda. So I don't know the whole thing yet, but I think discerning, being able to discern for ourselves and to remain open, to constantly remain open also to ourselves and to discern ourselves. I think this is a huge part of the lineage that we all come from, whether you're from Rajasthan, Odisha, anywhere in India or any of the South Asia diaspora, no matter what religion you follow, what culture, what customs, what celebrations you do. This is I've traveled extensively over the last 20 years, which I didn't talk about, but whatever. and it is the thing that I noticed the most. And I think it is one of the ways that we have really preserved the culture, is by this keeping the discernment alive and really engaging constantly with the stuff that we want to hold on to in our culture. It comes from that. And there's two sides to that, which we haven't touched on, but hopefully maybe another conversation we can touch on, because there's the other side of it too, where you can hold on so tightly that you miss the other side of the thing, So it's like every light has a shadow. And I often feel that we're really good at I know the topic is Indian pride, and I think we're really good at being proud of our culture. And then I think there's also the opportunity of addressing some of the shadows that we have. Anyway, I digress. My point is I respect the discernment, and I think it's such a, we say like, oh, I live between the two countries, and I hear this a lot, like America as a big, like a number one country in the world and all of that. And, there's points where I'm like, yeah, I see that. But by far, I feel like India has so many beautiful things that I honestly don't know if it's ever going to transfer, whether through appropriation or through appreciation or appropriation in America. And one of those things is just the way people engage with each other. Like, you know, we have these concept in Gujarat and in Rajasthan. I don't know about other parts of India, but it's called dairo. You know, and dairo is basically like you sit together, you drink chai, you have nashta, and there's, you know, it's like a all night long discussion on anything, and you
Yari
just talk
dosti.
about it. You just lay it out. You just lay it out as it is, and then it's like nothing's happened. Everyone just walks away with like no feelings hurt or anything like that. And I think there's a lot of power and beauty in that. There's a lot of power and beauty in that. So anyway, Varun, thank you for creating this little dairo.
Definitely. You know, that dairo reminded me of the first event that we did for the Gujarati Society of Southern California, which is a little organization in LA, was a dairo. And it was by Osman Mir. No, it was by, I forget the name, but it was a dairo. And I mean, it was beautifully received and it was really well done. And the person who had come in was amazing at it. So yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, because I kind of want to talk about, I mean, we have that message that you brought up from Preeti. Her comment was that she wrote a book on Indian Americans in Minnesota, published by the Minnesota Historical Society. And just yesterday, after hiatus of 8 months, she presented information on Indian Americans to the Minnesota Department of Transportation and shared some of the information that we're talking about right now, which is about how we are proud of our heritage and the appropriation of yoga and Ayurveda. You know, I think Ayurveda is going to be appropriated at some point if it already
It already is.
You know,
it already is.
It's already there.
It's already there.
What have you seen, Deepika?
I think people back home in India will respect it more once that happens. Like just the way with yoga.
That's such an unfortunate thing, you know? It's such an
We need
unfortunate thing that it, like, we
approval.
like, it's like it gets exported and then it gets imported, and then like all of a sudden everybody starts to care about it. So I don't know, but there is a lot of appropriation of Ayurveda, and some of it also even comes in the format of not just consumerism. Like yesterday, I was at I'm right now outside of my normal home, and went to a grocery store to get some goods, and I literally saw, and Varun, I'll share this photo with you guys later, but like literally a chai box. It was like make your chai at home, and it had like the turmeric chai, and I'm like, man, nobody's drinking no turmeric chai in India. And then like some, you know, and then regular sada chai, and then it had like the gurney for straining the tea and stuff. And it was like packaged, you know, and it was on like whatever, $19.99. And I'm like, okay, great. And people, you know, and I mean, when I go to Mumbai and I see people want lattes, people want mocha, they want their, you know, I don't know if there's any rights issue here, but like bulletproof coffees and things like that. And so it's just like really interesting to observe it. But I think the question of yoga, you know, the comments about appropriation of yoga and Ayurveda is very close to my heart. And sometimes to the point where it like really bothers me and I have to like walk away from social media because I'm like, I just can't handle this anymore. And so one of the ways I think that culture really gets appropriated, whether it's in yoga and Ayurveda, it's when we ourselves as Indians, as Desis, we don't value, when we forget to really take the time and get to know, which is what Vivek was saying, like getting to know my religion or getting to know what is Jainism? What do I believe? Like what are my thoughts on karma? What are my thoughts on these things? Right. And so I think, you know, I'm always like the one that's like, okay, before I point the finger to someone else, I gotta like, you know, that saying, like before you point the finger to someone else, look at yourself first. Yeah. And so
you're three pointing back at you. Yeah.
Absolutely. But appropriation is very, very harming. And I will say harming in terms of as a healer, it's very harming because I've seen it where people will try keto, people will try all different types of diets. And now there's like even Ayurvedic keto. I just heard about it earlier this week. And I'm just like, There is no such thing as Ayurvedic keto. Like there is no such a thing. Like, and I'm not like some scholarly person that studied this for 50 plus years. You know, like I went the typical route. Like I literally attended a workshop and I was like, I'm not going to get all these answers and I need to go to India and just enroll in a university. And that's what I did. And so a lot of my knowledge comes from just being in school, being studying the way a Ayurvedic student would learn, and then also investing outside of school to learn different perspectives. So I studied with people like Dr. Vasant Lad and Dr. Frawley and, you know, Dr. Claudia Welsh and things like that. And just understanding also Ayurveda in it from a how does it apply to the population in America. And I think that's one of the ways that appropriation has been allowed, is I think we distill it down, we try to simplify something that does not need simplification because it already is very natural in its inheritance existence. You know what I mean? If
Right.
you look at Ayurveda just as a whole, it's a very simple thing. You connect with nature, you look at outside, what's going on outside in the weather. Today I had an early rain at 5 a.m. and it's freezing, it's 42 degrees.
Mhm.
You bet I made like adrak wali chai with black pepper and I'm drinking it.
Mm.
Like it doesn't take, you know, like this is the beauty of it. And so I think with appropriation, we have to be able to also look at ourselves and understand like where am I playing a role in the appropriation as well.
So can you tell me what are the benefits of that adrak wali chai with the black pepper in the winter?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's got adrak is, first of all, it's very good for your metabolism and blah, 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 and all of that. So I can sit here and give you all of the, how does it all break down? But we have to look at it like, you know, the most simplest thing that I always go back to in Ayurveda, it's like today's nectar is tomorrow's poison. And like attracts like and opposite heals. So it's cold outside. I know it looks sunny, but it's actually cold outside. It's 42 degrees or 40 degrees today. And I have no business drinking smoothie for the next 3 months. Because that is not what my system needs. What my system needs is warmth. What my system needs is some way to assimilate and digest what is happening outside of me. And so both black pepper and ginger are warming on the digestion. It's also warming on the circulation. It will increases the blood circulation, which therefore then increases and maintains the temperature of the skin, of the body. And so that is one of its whole health benefits. And so I will say one of the things about appropriation, which Vivek, let me know what your thoughts are on it as well. And same for you as Varun. It's that we look for, one of the things we really have to shift is our mindset. And so I'm wearing this t-shirt. I don't know if you guys can tell, it says decolonize. Decolonize. And I think we really have to look at even our health from the lens of decolonization. So instead of really looking at fat as fat, we really have to look at, are we joyful? Instead of like counting calories and all of that, we have to really think about what does our heritage say, which is to eat when we're joyful. We don't eat, right? We don't eat when we're angry. Like I remember, like even till today, if I'm mad, my mom is just like, no, don't eat, go for a walk. We don't eat when we're angry. We don't eat when we're upset. There's a lot of intelligence in that. And I do believe that, you know, we need to teach the next generation, or even our generation, I would say, because like I was never taught, like, why do you not eat yogurt in the winter? It was just like, you just don't do it. And it was like, why? You just don't do it. And it wasn't until I went, you know, and started discovering Ayurveda and started really looking into what is this, you know, what we call gunas, right? What are the qualities and characteristics and how do they apply to us? And there's such pure intelligence. And the colonized mind says, question it, ask for the study. What are the health benefits? And I'm not saying that's wrong. I think there's space for that, for sure. There's space for that. But we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So just because we don't know the health benefits of putting adrak in your chai, it doesn't mean you shouldn't put adrak in your chai.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting conversation. I had some chala just because of eating a lot of like wedding food and some others, and the heat itself. Like I said, I don't tolerate a lot of heat that well. And my mom was telling me that, okay, like instead of like medication, basil seeds or takmaria that they put in faluda, the natural coolant, like it helps cool down the body, along with some rose essence with some milk. So that is what I had earlier, again, within the same school of philosophy.
Yes.
As the opposite of what you were having, because you need heat, I need some more cooling down in my system, which is just like a funny anecdote I thought you might find interesting.
No, but that's it. That is it. And if you continue to eat takmaria seeds every single day, your body is going to send you a signal of like, hey man, stop. Right? It's going to send you a signal. It's going to send you some kind of a signal. And so again, it goes back to that awareness and that inquiry and that discernment, and everything again comes down to connection.
It's very true.
There's also something.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
When we ask and the whys, and they're not answered, like when you're growing up in the rebellious phase, you're like, well, if you don't know why, then why should I be doing this? And that forms a very interesting conversation. And then only when you grow up do you realize, and again, you start studying history, do you realize that our parents and their parents at some point stopped asking why. And which is funny, because India was the source of all like Shastra. Yes, I know precisely. I was just getting to that point. Like we had Shastras, we had people from different schools of theologies, like Indian, Western, Middle Eastern, have debates and discussions. And a lot of people took inspirations from here, including early Greek philosophers. Problem is, somewhere down the line, people stopped asking questions, and people stopped giving information and passing them down because they were simply banned. Like information was banned, like Sanskrit languages was banned, schools was banned, teaching was banned. So I think at some point people lost the ability to teach and to transfer a lot of that information, which is why people simply who were like obedient, because they still say that India is the country of like the Shramans and, you know, the people who look after their parents and all of these things and don't ask a lot of questions before just, you know, my dad told me he's a wise man. We've had a good relation, so I'll just do it because, you know, he's talking for the benefit of me. Problem is, the world changed so much in the last 30 years. Like we can't just expect our kids to follow whatever we're teaching them blindly. If we don't know something, we need to tell them, hey, I don't know this. To my best knowledge, I would like you to do this. But, you know, when you grow up, you can make your own decisions. You know, at some point, you even have to put your foot down. But this is how people need to have conversations that, hey, our culture has taught us all of these things. You know, there's Ayurveda, there's homeopathy. Homeopathy is not necessarily Indian. I didn't even know about this until like I met a white homeopathic practitioner who told me it's European. It does have like one of the biggest schools of homeopathy in India, like West Bengal, India, where a lot of people still practice it. But at some point, we started losing the appreciation for our own culture, whether it's turmeric or, like as some people have tried to correct me, is turmeric. Haldi, and you know, whether it's anything else. Like at some point we lost, and I'm equally guilty. Like there's a huge yoga institute within the same like half-mile radius as where I live, and my dad, who just walked in the room a few minutes ago, has been telling me to like go to that institute like over the last decade and a half, to help with just anything and everything, whether it's breathing and allergies, because, you know, allergies are going to be a big problem if you're living in like certain cities in India because of like ppm and air quality. So what do? You need to do pranayam to help just have your muscles be a little more used to these things. But I didn't really appreciate those things, and I didn't really carve out that much time for these things. And even now, like if my dad will tell me something, my brain defaults to like, you know, conflict. Why? Like if I don't get the why, I'm a very inquisitive person. I don't really like to follow something, but then over time I realized that no, there has to be a logic and a reason for everything. If I can't get the why from him, let me see if I can get it from elsewhere. If not, I equate it with, is it harming me or anyone else to do it? If not, just why not do it?
So I have a why question for you.
Go ahead.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think we're not appreciative of that culture of, you know, everything that they hand down to us, but we don't have a reason? We don't get a, you know, logical reason. Why do you think
part of it is what just Deepika mentioned, the colonizations over time. It was important for them to wipe out certain parts of our history because our history predates theirs. Like Indian history is the oldest history, even from like archaeological civilizations, the things that they've found, whether it's the Harappa or Mohenjo-daro, which are so far the oldest like civilizations. But then they looked at Dwarka, and then which is submerged, and they found artifacts and evidences, and there's been no study since. Like they found that something over here existed. That's the Indian version of Atlantis.
Yeah.
That makes the entire story of Krishna true. And now with carbon dating, we can actually find a historical, like westernized timeline to these events. But then even the Indian like side of the politicians, they realize that this can have such a huge political movement over here, so we'll not do it. The same goes with Ram Setu, like back in
And
the
economical
90s.
impact.
Yes, like everything.
Like,
So
you
it's
know
just,
who is very busy signing some economic deals in the West right now.
yeah. So that happens, and over time, like people, like just India became a poorer country. Like our priorities at some point just needed to be, how do we preserve our like civilization, which is like at least 10,000 years old, while at the same time survive, like make sure our kids have a roof. Like this is why it's important to have these discussions, so that people get more educated about things that they weren't. Like we were all conditioned in a different type of education system, which was built by the British, and not much has changed ever since. Like even the Indian like educational minister himself says proudly that we haven't changed or added a single thing in like the syllabus. And we're like, why? Like we elected you guys so that you can help fix things. You can help fix the conditioning, the brainwashing, and the self-loathing. And this is funny. I met so many like American friends who asked me this question: why do Indians hate like the Indian culture so much? They're very proud sometimes, like when you call Kamala Harris Kamala auntie to take credit for that, but at the same time be really disdainful and like self-loathing about several parts of your own culture. And not everything can be reduced to like a caste system or any of the follies of the country. Yes, we have a lot of things that we fixed in the past. We have a lot of things now that we are working on fixing, and we will continue as we evolve as a society to have a lot of things that we have improved. But
and there are theories. And there are theories, academic theories, that are coming out now that says the caste system was really created by the British as a way to divide the country.
Yeah, they bastardized the Varna system.
And so I think what's really so there's a couple of things you said, Vivek, that I really need to touch on, which was where did we really, and I think Varun, you started asking like, where did we lose it? And so I don't have the answer, but I coined this thing called the roti kapda or makan complex, which is, I think, what our parents and even our grandparents, I think, had to deal with, because both of my grandparents were part of the freedom fighting movement on either side. And so, for them, like when I speak to my Nana till this day, he has all these stories that he shares with me that I just like, my mind is just like baffled that like, I can't believe he experienced this in his lifetime and he is alive in 2020 to tell me about it. And I'm seeing the impacts of it. I'm seeing the micro impacts of it leading in my mom's behavior, my masi, my mama, even my dad's side, how these things are playing out. And I think we haven't mentioned this word, we mentioned it lightly, but I think decolonization of the mindset, it is so essential right now for our communities, whatever community you come from. I think it's such a huge part of it, is to really sit there and even think about each of your thought and like, it's like, why do I value this over this? Why do I value this over this? And that is the for whoever is talking about yoga and Ayurveda cultural appropriation, I think it's one of the ways that we really protect the yoga and Ayurveda, because I think that is what the yogis did, right? Like all of these arts, all of these really rich knowledge went underground, and it lived because it went underground and it preserved itself, and it didn't like, not to hate on the influencers, but they weren't like, hey, here's like my morning routine. Hey, this is what you do to da 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 da. And there's nothing wrong with any of that, by the way. I think it's beautiful when it's done, with the regard of preserving something. But there is a problem in also simplifying things. And I think that's often where you invite the appropriation, is when you try to simplify it. And I'm happy to say that I think a lot of the teachers who came to the West, whether it was to teach yoga, whether it was to teach Ayurveda, whether it was to teach Tantra, or whether it was teach to preserve Sanatan Dharma or any of that, they simplified it. They simplified it, which means that now it removes the authenticity and the fullness, the richness of what already has been functioning for so long, and you're changing it. And because you as an Indian are changing it, you're giving the other person who could also benefit from the richness, you're giving them a diluted version. And so it's never going to feel the same way. So like one of the common things, I posted about this a couple of days ago about sattvic food. It's like the number one question I get, what is rajas, what is tamas, and what is sattvic food? What is sattvic food? And I'm like, it's something, sattvic food is simple, it's sensible, and it's seasonal. But more than anything, because it's all of these things, it's sustainable. It's sustainable. You don't have to fight against the grain. You don't have to worry about getting mangoes in January because it's not available where you live. Right. It's available, like in India, it's available in the month of like July to May, June, July-ish. That's when it's available. In United States, if you live in SoCal, it's available in the summer times. It comes from Mexico. But if you're trying to get mangoes in January, they're coming from Brazil because Brazil is experiencing summer. And now you are completely working against the grain. And now you've got other plethora of issues that you're dealing with. And so I think like it's so simple. It is so simple that you can't package it. You can't package it. And I think that's where the problem with appropriation really comes into, is that we're trying to apply this capitalistic, consumeristic model to something that is not it. That is just like, be with nature, like see what's happening outside, eat accordingly.
It's like the LaCroix version of OJ.
Oh my God. Yes.
Like it's not necessarily bad, but it's like it barely has the essence of the original thing. Like, so I can really feel this because I've been and I've seen some of those, and like I understand that yoga, and I had some of this discussion with like the Bhakti Yoga club that I was in, and they said that you cannot really remove the Bhakti aspect from it and just expect the exercise itself to be fulfilling. And if you do, then you're being kind of condescending and disrespectful towards the original as well. Like you can do it, but you just need to know that you can't have one without the other. Like the spirituality and the meditation, you can't remove these words from like Indic philosophy and then just have it by itself to match like whatever your versions of things are. You have to be accepting and open to these things as well.
Yeah, and part of sorry, I was going to say one part of my stories is I used to teach yoga publicly in studios and things like that. And, I would get hired occasionally to teach in yoga teacher trainings and, to cover Ayurvedic philosophy and yoga philosophy and things like that. And without a fail, it's like, I would always get asked, well, can you not talk about this thing, whatever the X, Y, and Z is? And I'm like, but that X, Y, and Z is the reason that Yoga Alliance or whoever is asking you to cover these topics, and it's a requirement for you to do it. And then it's like, well, but could you not? And so I literally have to start making decisions where I'm like, no, actually, no. If I'm presenting myself as a teacher, my job is to present the information, to share the knowledge. It is up to the student to stretch their minds. It is up to them to inquire how this information lands with them. How does it assimilate into their life? How are they going to choose to respond to it? And I think, this is what it kind of takes. I think we really have to hold that integrity as leaders in our community, but even just as individuals, when you see the ghee in Sprouts or Whole Foods or whatever, question, why is this ghee like 1999 or 1599 or whatever, but my Masi and my Fufa and them are saying like, no, gina kabai. Like, and I think diabetes thejai. Like, oh, you get diabetes from eating ghee and stuff. And so much of the story is really like takes me back home over and over and over again. And I cannot stress decolonization. I cannot stress how important this step is, I think, in our collective healing as Desi diaspora. Like, it is so essential for us to really start to think about, where do all these behaviors come from?
So what can we do to decolonize? Let's talk about that. Like, can you give a suggestion on what, Deepika and then Vivek?
Yeah, sure. So I think one is understanding, and I'm still in the process of my own decolonization every single day in how I live my life as a woman, as a working woman, all of that, is to really go back to the way that I think the colonizers really took over the world. And we see this, right? Like, it's like, if you don't do kaam, you're useless. And this is a huge part of the story that we tell ourselves, I think, in the community. It's like, if somebody doesn't work, or if somebody takes a 1 month long vacation or whatever, they're coined a certain way. And so I think those little micro behaviors and aggressions is really part of the decolonizing healing and decolonization of the mindset as well, is to really come from how are you feeding into the model that exists, that is based on the Euro and Anglo centric worldview. Because if you study, whether it's Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism, Sanatan Dharma, whatever, it's never divisional. It's always inclusive. It is inclusive. It always includes community. It always includes fun. It always includes spirituality. It includes discipline, but it also includes celebration.
Right.
And so there's room
that's
for...
That's what they're called dharma.
Yes.
Sorry, I just want to say that. The word dharma translated to religion. Religion is very myopic and exclusive, my way or highway. Dharma is very inclusive. It literally translates to righteousness and what's right. And what's right is knowledge. What's right is facts. So yeah, please continue.
Yeah, no, inclusivity, I think, and that's, we have to really begin to look at this, from everything that we do in our life, whether it's how do we choose to operate in our work life, how do we choose to also view our relationship, how do we interact with our parents and all of that. We really have to look at it from the lens of inclusivity. One of the books that has really shifted, and I would say that more than shifted, I would say it really touched me deeply in the last year, is by a book called Together by Vivek Murthy, who is the formal Surgeon General to Obama, I believe. And that book, I mean, it said everything. It said everything about, and he talks about, he's married to, I believe, a white woman, and her relationship to her parents. And then he talks about his relationship to his parents who come from the South, and, also the problems between brothers in India, between land and property and all of that, which is like Ghar Ghar Ki Kahani, right? Like there's always this thing happening. And he talks about the idea of community. I think like the lot of us here today also are so far removed from our intimate communities, our kakakakis and chachachachis and masamasis and all of that. Like the world that we live in, we're no longer, I mean, I'm in Portland, my parents are in New Jersey. I have my aunts and uncle in a different state. I have families in different countries. So it's like we have really peeled ourselves in some ways after this roti kapda makan complex in a way that it has torn us away from what makes us who we really are. So I think reclaiming that is a really big part of decolonization journey. And I think the second thing that I really like to talk about is rest.
Interesting.
Rest.
Okay.
I think we have a lot of guilt in our communities around resting.
That's very interesting. You wanna explore that further? You want to talk a little bit about it? Like what kind of trauma, and what do you mean by rest? Like what is true resting? Because I don't know if people even know what true resting really means.
Well, I don't want to tell people how to live their life, but I will say that I think as I said, I think reclaiming our rest is a really huge part of the decolonial healing, of to not constantly chase the status quo, whether it's money, whether it's fame, whether it's even reputation. I think that's, it's a very subtle thing that happens in our communities where it's like, log kya kahenge, but the other part of log kya kahenge is like, we want to show that like, hum bhi kuch hai, like that thing is again, rest, because when we look at health across the board with Indians, whether it's in India, whether it's here in America, whether it's in London, and I won't speak so much for the UK because my involvement in the UK is very slim, but I will say, having lived my life between India and America, you can see there are certain things that are just continuous. And this thing around resting is one of the things that I see a lot. It's a lot. Like, I don't think that our parents, my parents particularly, even know how to take a vacation.
Yeah.
Let alone resting. Even when they come home from work, they're usually like worried about something. There's always something happening, and that has a huge impact on the nervous system, and that does feed into how it impacts your health. And so when I see now the rising numbers in India amongst women of PCOD, PCOS, endometriosis, infertility rates increasing over the last 10 years, for men also the libido decreasing in the last 20 years. All of these are, rest plays a huge factor in this. It's not just diet, it's not just exercise, it's also rest.
So you're saying that even when people are, let's say, like physically resting, right? They're just sitting in front of the TV, but their mind is constantly like engaged in something. They're thinking about their work and all of that. So they're not really resting.
There's not really true rest.
Right.
Which sometimes true rest is in the playfulness, right? Being in the body or whatever, just being playful with your friend, joking around, whatever, going for a walk, whatever that is, but just that true rest, that deep rest that we all need.
So Vivek, what do you think? What's one way to colonize?
Yeah, I'm going to quickly follow up that with, I saw a video today of this YouTuber, Jamie Alter. So if you know like old Indian movies, there used to be a white guy in all of those Indian movies. Tom Alter was his name. Like really white, really tall, and he grew up in India. Like he was born in Lahore. His dad was like one of the English like officers or something, and his son he also was born in India. So Jamie's experiences are very funny, and he does a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos because he's a Caucasian born in India, talks flawless Hindi, and has very interesting experiences. His family, half of his family is still in the US. Like his wife is over here, and I think she's also American. But he has very interesting experiences from the other side. That when he goes over there, like his home is over here. He did a video yesterday comparing America and India, and he mentioned this exact thing. He said there's, a sense of dostana, a yarana, like chai pe masti.
Yeah.
He said that masti is an essence is missing in the American culture, and that is uniquely Indian.
Yes.
And like you wouldn't trade that for anything. It's again like this is a video. I'll just share the link over here. And that to me was also something very important. I had a friend Piyush who told me that, he liked this one girl like a lot, but things weren't like getting along that well. And he said the one thing that he will miss when he is with her is he won't be able to like play the 80s and 90s like Hindi songs and have that sort of like a playful banter relation. But she's also enjoying just as much, not to support him only. So that was just,
Uh-oh.
But
It's in and out.
Is an essence. Can you hear me? That is in an essence something that's missing
from the culture in the West, which is even amongst Indians in the West. Like people are not that social that if you're at someone's house till like 11:15 at night, not necessarily in the weekends, but also on the weekends, people are waiting for you to leave so that they can get on with their own things. Nothing wrong with that. Like I've been there, but like people need to develop more meaningful bonds, especially because their families are not around that much. Like Deepika said right now, if you have family all over, it's important for you to have like really good, strong local friendships. And that was one of the biggest reasons I moved back to Mumbai. Like that was the only reason why I moved. Sorry, go ahead, Deepika.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think one way to think about rest, is also ease.
Yeah, comfort.
Yeah, ease.
So that reason why I moved back was because I wanted to be with my family. I wanted to be with all of my banjas and banjis, like have them be jumping like with me, like a walking jumping gym. Because I miss that, and that to me gave me a lot of solace. Like these were my people. I'm an only child, so like for me this was even more important to have deeper, meaningful bonds with my own family, with my cousins, who some of who look up to me. Like I have a cousin who calls me Google Bhaiya. And I have a cousin who calls me fake news, just because like sometimes I've been wrong in arguments. So I am glad that I have these meaningful relations with these people, and that is just something missing. One of the other things about decolonization that Varun mentioned, like just before the rest conversation, I saw a video of Dr. Shashi Tharoor like a long time back. He's an Indian MP right now, and I'm not like a huge fan of him as a politician, but when it comes, he spent decades living in London, so he had a very like direct take on like racism over there, and like colonialism from them like was just as much as getting civilization to these places where the one didn't exist. Like that's still the version of history that they're taught. And no country teaches, like apart from Germany, most countries do not teach their kids like about the things that they have done which are wrong. And that makes perfect sense. Like Indians have a different version of what happens with India-Pakistan wars, and Pakistan has a different version of the events. And like I recently found out that like most of the things that I believed to be true were not 100% truth. Again, Anikantwad comes in picture. So it's important to have these conversations. But Shashi Tharoor like talks point by point about these things. When like people talk about the Brits, the first thing that a lot of people talk about is the buildings that they built, the schools that they built, and the trains that they brought. And that we wouldn't have had those like if it weren't for those. And then Shashi Tharoor talks about it, that everything that they did was for their own exploitation. They built trains so that they could loot easily, so that they could steal the loot and bring it to port cities to then take it back easily. Nothing that they did was for us. Like after they left, we took over like everything that was left and then build it for us. So they don't get to like get the credit for beating us to a pulp and then for us to rebuilding ourselves for any of that. So I think that was a very, like he has some really good points, and he's written a book or two on that as well. So I think it's like very informative if you guys want to see that or just hear his talk. It just gives all of us talking points as well on just these things in general. So yeah.
Is that the video you just shared?
Yeah, that was a video I shared right before the Jamie Walters video.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, he has these two others in which he's debating like other journalists and others while he was over there. I think this one was him in Oxford, which was just funny. Like it was he owned there. Like, everyone in the audience, when people realize that it's not only about money. Like if we calculate the money, it's roughly about $45 trillion is the total accumulated wealth in today's money, is what the Brits stole from us, which if they hadn't, that would have been a total of 190 trillion if India was just left alone. So they don't get to like talk about these things when our economy is now not even a $3 trillion economy. It's less than that, Indian economy. So they took away our limbs, and then they're taking credit for living us, with whatever they left us. So it's important to realize that, they did everything for themselves, and we shouldn't be thankful for it. That's like, abuse. And it's important to realize that as, someone who has been abused, these are the traits of it. Like you need to stop feeling guilty or thankful for the times when you weren't, or you just need to be able to call them out. And you can only call them out when you have some perspective.
Right, definitely. Yeah, I mean, growing up, the education system, like we talked about this earlier, the education system taught us certain things. And I was in Dubai, so I learned like 10th grade or 9th grade, all of that was the Indian system. And we were taught certain things in history about India. And I think you mentioned, Vivek, that yeah, it turns out not to be true, not to be the whole truth. You know, I was just looking at the elephant and I was just looking at the leg, but not the whole perspective, not the whole picture. And also there are videos out there that talk about how the NCERT education board have written textbooks with a particular agenda in mind. And so, you know, it's kind of interesting. And
Yeah.
what, like, right, Vivek, what's your experience with that? Because you were also in that, Deepika, you were also in that system.
Yes.
Like I still see those books every now and then when my cousins read them. Like they're constantly taught, like, and examples are the worst because they'll pick. So this is one thing that I don't get, and I'm really glad that I was able to have this one conversation with an argument over Twitter. But Indians get a lot of hatred for sati and caste system. Like Hindus and everyone who associates themselves to an Indian identity, which generally like everyone in the Sanathan ecosystem, Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, even Punjabis and Sikhs to an extent. Everyone gets that much hatred for like some things that were there in the country about for 100 or 150 years. Not before that, not after that. Then comes the caste system, which itself is debatable. And then comes the Aryan theory, which was used a lot by initially the British, but then used a lot by Southern Indian politicians because they used it as a like policy to help polarize their people against the Northerners. And they call it like against Hindi imposition because they don't want that much. Is a very particular brand of like leftist historians who allow all of that. That still happens online. Like on Wikipedia, you're not allowed to edit or add content to a lot of these things. And the second you add anything that goes against their views, you're blocked, banned, whatever. Even the Wikipedia India ecosystem is so bad that I had a friend who quit it after 13 years because he said, I can't deal with the corruption or with the amount of back scratching you have to do to be able to just get any edit through when all you're doing is just saying truth about things that are non-polarizing. Like even then you have to do all of this. So it's the post-colonial era where we didn't have rulers, but just a lot of people wanted to be rich and a lot of middlemen, a lot of corruption, just kept all of that. And then comes in history. And just all of us being taught the wrong history. Like we were not taught anything about Maharana Pratap or like Chhatrapati Shivaji or any of the 7 different 100 to 500-year-old dynasties. Like we learned nothing about Porus, who defeated Alexander. We learned nothing about any of those, or Chandragupta Maurya,
yes,
or Chanakya,
or Ashoka Empire.
So what do I learn about Chanakya was from the show Chanakya from 40 years ago, which I saw in the lockdown period, like the second month of lockdown. I just binge watched it all and then like looked up the Chanakya Niti and a lot of other things. So I think over time we were just taught that, you know, we don't have a lot of history of our own that we need to be proud of. But simultaneously, the Spanish Inquisition and the Portuguese Inquisition, especially the Goan Inquisition, is one of the most brutal ones in history. Like I won't go into details about it because, you know, it's very traumatizing. Not everyone needs to know about the details unless they're ready for it. But the things that they did, like they banned the language, they took away all the men. They said the people over there need to learn Portuguese or Spanish within 40 days if they want to survive. And they just, you know, made it impossible for things to continue. So it's just all of that still continues to be taught. And the saints who like broke every single temple in Goa, the state of Goa is now going to celebrate his birthday, like who celebrated the conquisition in which he trampled upon every single idol. He said that, and this is a quote from him, "It gives me immense joy when I break these idols from like an entire city which has been converted. We don't need those anymore." So it's just, you know, they're still appreciated and celebrated over here. Or Tipu Sultan, for that matter. We were taught that he was a brave hero, but not about all the rad things that he did, like even if he fought against the Brits. So it's just, you know, we need to take a hard look at all of these things. And some people online are doing a great job. There's a Twitter handle called True Indology, Trinidad Exile, who does a great job of just providing a lot of like actual historical artifacts, even if it's scriptures. There's this one guy who's read thousands of books and has, again, hundreds of thousands of followers because he has replies when it comes to historical sources. Not a lot of us, like if you ask me about the sources of my information, I'm so scatterbrained, I won't be able to pick those up. He has been able to respond to a lot of those things. So we need to start using some of that information and then start including some of that in the history that we teach to the next generation, so that we don't have people tomorrow who are praising these like terrorists and Maoists and just all of these people and are very hateful towards our own culture and are somehow still praising all the things that they did, like the Spanish, the Portuguese, the British, but that doesn't get associated with the identity of their religion. Like whatever we do gets associated. The sati was included as, and the caste system was just something that we still are made to be feel guilty about. But the things that they did, the conversions, the murders, the everything else, none of that gets painted to them as an identity. Like even when I hear the term South Asian a lot in the last decade or so, I've started seeing it a lot more in the contemptful way, in erasure of Indian identity, to have the good things of India generalized in the entire South Asia, but the bad things of the rest of the South Asia also generalized as Indian bad things. Like people get really mad when you talk about, Punjab and Bengal being part of India. They're like, no, that's a different ethnicity. And I'm like, India was part of so many different like civilizations and cultures and languages, and that is something that we appreciate and adore. Like we're not dividing that, but it doesn't
I
separate
wanna
out.
I want to jump in a very quickly because I know you're going somewhere, and so I want to go back to the books you mentioned and the scholarly information that is available, and connect that to the question that Varun asked of decolonization. And so I'm learning this still. Again, I'm still learning that part of the decolonization is also understanding who is the author. Who is the author writing this and presenting this information, and from what perspective are they sharing this information? I think this is, again, such a small nuance way of how we learn and how we assimilate with the information that comes our way. And so for me, again, going back to our story, it was like, I had to literally look through my bookshelf and just go, how many of these Ayurvedic books or yoga philosophy books are actually written by Indian authors versus people who are not Indian and they have studied Ayurveda from the perspective of, academically, which there's nothing wrong with, versus those who are coming from the perspective of influencers and their whole identity and their careers are just built around, I wrote this book on yoga appropriation, or I wrote this book on Ayurveda or daily routines or this or that and the other. And then their entire career is just basically built on such a small, like a hair, and so selling it as Ayurveda or as yoga or as Indian philosophy or as preservation of the Indian culture. So I think like that, again, going back to part of the decolonization and part of like really understanding who are we taking this information from, and even questioning, because there are so many now gurus and things like that are like, I call it parroting, and it may not be the kindest language, but I mean, that's what you're doing. It's like totapan, right? Like you're just repeating information that has existed for so long, that is available in Shastras. And I get it that not everybody needs to study the Shastras or whatever. Not everybody needs to learn Sanskritam or anything like that. But there is a lot of like, even in the Varuna, I don't feel comfortable saying the name, but like, there is an Indian brother in LA pretending like he's got it going on. And I'm like, dude, like you're just repeating other people's word, combining it together and selling it as if like you're shattering my mind. And it's not. And I think, again, going back to decolonization and, preserving rather than appropriating our own culture goes back to that. How are you also giving credit to the information that you are learning? That's another part of this layer. This is another huge part of the layer of our identities. And just because, I come from a Gam, that doesn't mean that whatever my grandmother taught me about womb healing or about whatever, how to make, achar or whatever, it doesn't mean like she's wrong because this piece of information is being now presented in a certain way. Because let's face it, science always catches up later than a lot of, I'm sorry, but like science catches up way later than the Shastras,
Definitely.
right? Like the brain gut connection. It's like, yeah, we know, like, we don't, like in India, you don't like, that's the first thing we ask, right? Like, how's your poop today? Like, and we don't say poop, but we just go like, how's, chapani, right? You just go, how's your health?
Yeah.
That's the thing that we
Normal question
ask.
to ask. Yeah.
It's
It's very interesting because I got a comment on one of my posts on Instagram from someone our age, and it was talking about how there are copper plates laid under temple grounds, and how the copper plate absorbs energy from the earth and passes that on to everyone attending the temple, right? So it's this energy transfer collector and passing it on. And so they were asking for scientific proof. They're like, what proof do you have that this actually works? Like, do you really believe it? You come from a scientific background. I mean, it's like, it's written around for so many years. It's been around, people are using this. Like, why do I have to provide proof that it actually exists? And I was in a state of mind of like, why don't you provide me proof that it doesn't work?
It's like the God question.
Yeah.
It's like, you show me proof. Why do I have to show you proof? This has been, this is like written in the Shastras for so many years. And, so I just find it's very interesting how we have that little bit of doubt, where it's not logical enough, then it's like, there's that doubt, like, and then you just have to ask that question, like, show me that scientific proof. Without that, I don't believe.
Again, decolonizing the mindset, decolonization of the mindset. It's like this thing of looking for the proof rather than like really feeling the prana, the pulsation that it has for you. And actually, if you follow the Pran Shakti, you will know if you should be eating out of the copper, if you should be drinking out of the copper or not. There are times of the year where drinking out of a copper mug for me is not appropriate for who I am, for my prakriti and the person that I am. But I would not have had that information had I not, chosen the path of Ayurveda and such. And so now I incorporate that in my teaching. And it's like, this is the thing. It's like, you asked me earlier about how are some of the ways that yoga and Ayurveda has been appropriated. And I think one of the bigger ways is like this whole dissection of, oh, I'm pitta, oh, I'm vata, oh, I'm kapha, oh, I'm da 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 da. And I'm like, this simplification is creating a lot of harm. It's creating actually a lot of harm. And it is also removing the inherent simplicity that exists in these knowledges. And then it's like people, you just like just search the word Ayurveda and see what comes up. And it's a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke.
That becomes the second reason why a lot of people back in India don't like it that much, because of access to information. We have mithyatva, that is a lot of misinformation. We have a lot of fake babas just saying and like adding whatever they want to and then selling it to people, and then people get sick. So it's difficult to find a lot of right information, and we don't have a lot of like help from the government to help validate and sift through a lot of that. And then we've just become used to having that as the norm, that you can have some Dhongi Baba at some point of time just selling Ayurveda and not being from Ayurveda, the school of Ayurveda. So that then creates some genuine, valid concern in the minds of people.
Yes, the integrity is missing, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So it's just, and that's a difficult problem, and it is going to stay a problem. And the only way to not have that is to have like education where people who have these schools of thought, are able to impart it to a lot of those people. And I think for this, Zoom has created a great platform. Like I asked my mother what she did during lockdown, and she said there were so many like theological seminars that she was able to attend just because of Zoom. She did a 10-day workshop on acupressure. She said the last she started it was about 30 years ago. But then, because she's a woman, and then there are people in the family who are like making some funny comments or asking her to help with acupressure, and my dad was not that comfortable with it, so she just stopped. But then she realized that now we don't have that issue anymore, so she did that, and then she touched one point on my feet, and I yelped like a baby. So she said that this means that there's like this particular problem in this nerve connection. And we have a lot of like schools of chiropractic knowledge along with nervous system and all of these things, which are now supporting some of these in science. Like you said, science catches up. Funny thing, I'm drinking from a silver glass right now. because, a long time ago, my parents said that,
Cooling.
there's a reason why we do it, and then there are these benefits, yada, 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 like copper has and silver
Milk cha. Vegan cha, guys.
Nice. I had that earlier.
I remember the story from Harvard about, the benefits of fasting. And a lot of people are talking about fasting, intermittent fasting, and then everyone from the Middle East to the East were happy about it, because they do Ramzan, and then we have our upvas, whether it's on the Samvatsari or during Navratri or any of those things. And there are benefits to it, yes.
You mean intermittent fasting?
So when Howard came up with it, there were three things that I saw people doing. One, where people were like, we knew it for centuries, like there's nothing new about it. So they were very belittling to it and proud. Two, many people were saying, like, Harvard has finally proved something that we knew. And then the third one were people who were happy about the approval that they get. So it's very interesting that the take you see because of colonization.
The
Some
validation.
people still need
validation.
Caucasian validation. Or just Western validation, not necessarily Caucasian. They need to be validated by the West to trust it more, whether it's Ayurveda or homeopathy. And then, there's just a problem we see. And science does catch up to many of those things later on. Like some things it just will not be able to. And then, whether it's theology or other things, you have to have your own version of truth that you believe in, and then your version of faith, for the things you want to believe in or not, whether you're an atheist or not. But then science does catch up to a lot of things. So I think it's just important to be appreciative of our culture, our history, whether we know it or not. It's just, if you don't, pick up a book. We've had some book recommendations from some of your wonderful audience, or any of the other ones that Varun can recommend from, his people that he now. And we can start educating ourselves, for the things that we lack, rather than saying that we just don't know this or blaming the system for not helping us with this. I think then this comes to Purusharth, which is also again a part of our theology. That is our individual contribution. What is it that we do? If you want to be the change, you have to put in your Purusharth, your effort to do that.
Yes, very
absolutely. There's a couple of books I want to recommend, but my keyboard is acting funky, so I'm gonna name one of them, and then the other one I'm gonna try to switch the windows and then plop them in. But one is called The Spice Conquest. And it's definitely more on, I would say, it's not a light reading. It's not your, 3 steps to Ayurveda, but it's a really good one. It's a really good one if you really want to follow understanding how spices really did play a role in invasion around the world, and how the invaders came into India. It's a really good one. And then there's a couple of other ones that I will, as I said, just give me a couple of minutes, I've got a whole reference here. That
is what Columbus was looking for when he came to America, right? Spices and silk.
And so do you guys know what led the spice conquest?
No, this is one of the things that I do know.
It's all of the plagues. It's all of the European plagues.
Interesting.
And so I think it's quite interesting that we are not in a plague, but we're in a pandemic.
So what's the connection in plagues and spices? Like what?
Yeah, I would love to hear.
And again, I will have to double check and all of that. But the theory that this was years ago that I attended some, academic stuff that I love doing. And so it really talked about how world population, how does the world population increase, decrease across the world? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that was leading the, Western Europeans in towards Asia was they were seeing these deaths in people, below the age of 30. Whereas you would go to these Asian countries and people were living to 40, 50s, and 60s, which of course now we have, it's increasing. And in some ways we have regressed, as particularly in India, our age bracket is going down actually. Mm-hmm. And so it was just that. It was literally just that, why are people thriving here and why are we dying here?
Wow.
And so I always find it really interesting that, whenever people used to talk about India when turmeric lattes and chai and curry was not a thing, which is when I came to America, it was like, you know, like people would make fun of like all these things. And it's like at the same token, we have civilizations that were thriving, and how food really played a role in these thriving civilizations, that it actually a lot, you know, created this movement from people of the West going to the East looking for the thing. So they were not coming here for the diamonds and the gems. They were really the gems was the longevity. The gems and the richness were the spices. What was in the water, what is in the soil, that was propelling these people in these groups of population to really thrive to a longer age versus other way. And then you people, and now, you know, like as I was saying earlier, I digressed a little bit. Oh, India's dirty, India's poor, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, we were actually one of the first few countries, as far as I know, to have created a septic system.
We were the first one with the drainage system, with a really where the, you know, the waste would go out of the city and not just in the city.
Before Europe, we had the system.
And
so
it's
that
funny,
is
I was
part
just,
of the richness.
sorry,
That is part of the
I just want to make
richness.
a quick comment. It was the Native Americans who even taught Europeans that they needed to take baths because they would smell that much. Like I was just watching a Walks video recently, and they said that that's the reason why they had so much incense, because people, like especially people from like UK, that areas, they smelled more than anyone else. That's why they used to have incense, and they thought that changing clothes was just enough hygiene. They didn't even know how to like bathe properly. So it was them, the Native Americans and the Mayans and Incans, and they were the ones who taught all of those things to them. Sorry, please continue.
No, that's okay. I'm looking for these resources. You guys carry on for a couple of minutes.
Fascinating. So Kundan had a comment where we were talking about books, and he said the first thing I've been doing with famous white authors, or even new ones I discovered for the first time, is to immediately Google author name and racism and see what comes up. I've actually avoided buying from them as a result of the search results. That's very interesting technique. Thank you for sharing, Kundan. You know, we're talking about those books, and it's so easy for someone, for a new author, or anybody who's kind of just, you know, writing a book together just to get that fame, to insert their own agenda, to insert their own stories and create a whole new narrative out of something that already exists. And I feel like that's, you know, what we've been talking about has happened so much throughout history. And these concepts that have been derived 5,000 years ago, that have existed for so long, have been just diluted because, hey, I want to be, you know, get that 5 minutes of fame.
Yep. So I just found my document, and I'm about to like just give out a bunch of it. So please tread lightly as I post these here.
This looks like some really good heavy stuff.
It's really powerful, and especially if you're in the, you know, if you are an individual who's really interested in your own decolonial healing and understanding different perspective, I think these provide a really great views.
You know, you brought up one that says how Irish became white, and it's a very interesting thing that I've learned, and I think Kundan has also kind of helped me with that, is where the definition of whiteness has changed. You know, at some point it was this demographic was white, and then over time they have suddenly just added more and more people to this definition of whiteness. And that was a very interesting perspective, how just in the last like 10 years or so, it's the Eastern Europeans and kind of that area that added into the definition of whiteness.
Even MENA, like if you see census, a lot of people were offended with the fact that, you know, a lot of Middle Easterns had to mark themselves as white just because there was like nothing that they could categorize themselves as. So some people are mad about that, but some people are happy about that. And then there's others who have the, you know, the coconut complex, where they just are happy with, like, I forgot what the word was, but just behaving and acting as if you're white.
Assimilation?
No, there was some like white something word. It's like a combination word. Like something like white splaining, but something different. White passing, yes. So they're happy with white passing just because it avoids a lot of other things that they get associated to, especially coming from a list. And I don't blame anyone. Like everyone has reasons for their choices that they're making. But it's just interesting, the whole like dynamic with that as well. I had a conversation with a friend about when I found out, like I saw a picture of some like archaeologist who said that Jesus was, based even from like scriptures from the like Bible and stuff. He was a more of like a brown black guy with curly hair, was very ugly, and that's exactly what the book said. That's the reason, people were just happy. And there's a similar thing about colorism in India as well. Krishna, he's supposed to be Sham, he's supposed to be Savla, very dark, not very pretty, but he radiates this bliss. That's the reason why he has this following. But every time when we would have a depiction, when someone is playing Krishna, they will have to be like the whitest people or just plain to blue to avoid that whole like conversation. So there's the same conversation that like a lot of American Christians have about whether Jesus was white or not, just because they're not happy to, especially like some in the South, to have, whether you see the Confederate flags and then you see like other really extreme things, and you see white Jesus, and then they can't come to realization with any of the other things or any of such new findings, which are not necessarily new, just rediscovering the old.
Right. Yeah, there's this book called Blackout Through Whitewash, and that book was the first time I read about that, where Krishna was dark and Jesus was black, and African. The story existed in Africa. The African spirituality was the first thing that existed because everybody came out from the source of human is Africa, and the African kind of spirituality has taken that same story of Jesus, of Christ is Krishna, is the similar kind of stories around there. Sorry, Vivek, you were saying something?
No, I've like read the exact same thing, that because even like people who say like Pangea, Angea, the tectonical shifts that we've had, India was a part of Africa, and then when it came, and then just that's the reason why the entire South Asian identity like is basically Indian identity, and everything else is just assimilation, whether it's the North Indian like and East Asians, or Westerns where you have more like light-colored people. When you meet Turkish, Greek, and those identities. So I don't disagree with the fact that, we all came. And then when you talk about genetics, I had a friend like who told me that there's no way possible, like for us, if we are all Homo sapiens, let's just forget that, we killed the other humanoid creatures in existence and all of those theories, and just think about Homo sapiens. It's not possible to have like white people without there being black people first, because of the dominant gene and the color and the recessive genes. So it had to be that the ancestors, if Adam and Eve were a thing, they had to be black. That's the only way possible for any of that side to then have white and still not have black in the family. So that was just another finding that I had, which was, again, backed by genetics, just made so much more sense, but is very triggering to a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard conversation to have. It's like existence, right? It's like their whole existence, their whole life, they've believed a certain thing, that Jesus was white, and now suddenly, oh wow. I mean,
or like the South fought the Civil War to for their rights and not necessarily to keep the slaves. The North was
yoga is really American, you guys. I just want to just yoga. And so is Ayurveda. Ayurveda is really from LA. Just to know.
Yeah. It's all right.
Totally joking here. It's ridiculous. Sometimes I just have to sit back and laugh at it's just like, circus. It's quite a circus.
Did too. Like my mama visited the US in January, and he'd been one, and he was like one of the first people in the family who supported my decision, and then convinced my parents ki beta wahan pe jaake bigad nahi jayega. He won't start like doing the things that American Hollywood and all of these things portray.
We could have a whole episode just on that.
Yeah. And then he'll also come back, is what he guaranteed. So he was getting really nervous when I wasn't coming back. Like at some point he just called me and told me that, hey, like I'm not going to talk to you unless you get the flight tickets and then tell me that you have the tickets. Because he was getting so much pressure from like his parents. Like my nana was getting mad at him because tune bigad rakha, yada yada yada. Like poor guys, like I helped him, we do all of these things not for my own father to shout at me when I'm in my 40s. So that was just like a very interesting conversation. But when he came to the US in January, and then when he went back in February, he had this awe or this idea of like what the States is. And he said, I don't have that anymore. Like, yes, the air is nice, it's crisp. Coming from like Mumbai and living in the city, you do realize that. And he really liked Austin. And he like, I like the idea of like liberty and these like freedoms that people enjoy over here. And just things in general, there are a lot of great things, but I wouldn't trade India for a second. And like, this is what I thought America was. Unfortunately, it's like nowhere close. Just, because people don't value life so much over here, whether it's the healthcare or schooling or school shootings in general, like any of those things. He said, I would never feel comfortable having my kids over here and leaving my family over there for any of this. Like, we don't judge people who do make those decisions. Because again, everyone has to look out for their own. But he's like, we had a different perception of what the States was. And I'm so happy I made the trip. That allowed me to have this clarity and plus be more happy with where I am right now with my family. So
yeah,
I was happy.
I had my family come and visit a couple of years ago. My cousin brother, my brother, as we say, my brother came and visit with his wife and children and stuff. And they're fairly young. They're like in their early teens. And so when I saw them back home last year, I was like, hey, so tell me all the stuff that you liked, about America. And he's like, Wi-Fi and yogurt. I was like, okay, cool. So that's what he liked.
Oh, yeah.
And then I was like, he had his priorities straight. He's like, I like the Wi-Fi. It was fast. It was great. And I liked the yogurt because it was damn good. I was like, all right, cool.
I feel like there's this idea of America, and like, it's been maybe projected through movies. I don't know what exactly.
I have no idea where it started, but when I was like, okay, so then like, would you come and live here? And he's like, no, you guys don't live. You guys work. And you guys work. And he's like, that's all you do. You guys don't live. We know how to live, and he's like, Thea, we know how to live. Like, we live. And I'm like, you're right. You're like really, really, I'm like, it's kind of true because I live between the two spaces, and given the choice, I would say I also prefer, like, my heart is in India all the time. And this is not like some NRI line, because there's a lot of things around NRIs in India too. but I'm like, I genuinely feel way more alive when I'm back home. Compared to here.
It's very interesting.
But the Wi-Fi is good, you guys.
It's this kind of idea that, when I was there 15 years growing up in Dubai, I had an idea of what America would look like. And when I landed, I'm like, where is that water? I thought like America was like this waterfront property where you kind of just go and like vacation, like you always get to see this like beautiful views and things like that. And I landed in New York, LaGuardia, and I'm like, am I in the right place? Is this the right country? Where am I? It's very interesting.
So like my first 2 months, I didn't like the taste of water. It was just so bad. And I had always seen this idea that America water is so nice that people would just drink straight from tap. And I lived in Dallas, so it's not like in the middle of nowhere or any of those things. But I used to very rarely drink water. I had this packet of Glucon-D. I don't know, Varun, if you know what that is. It's just it's like Tang or some like flavor that you add to it, like something orange flavored and sweet. So that I would bring from India, because again, I didn't know where Indian stores were, and I would just dump that in water and drink a lot of that. And then I eventually got a water filter, and I was like, okay, now it tastes good. So I realized the taste of water itself, we had all of these ideas of what America was, and it's a big country. So you can't generalize it, just like India, right? It's like 30 countries packed in one. It's more diverse than all of Europe combined. America is a wide country with some great things and some things that they really need to work on a lot, especially the things in the regions in the middle, like the east and west, because of port cities, obviously they're more developed, but the middle really needs to get going.
Very true.
I'm very grateful to be here. I'm grateful that we are having this discussion, and it's super lighthearted, and I've just gained a lot from this.
I wanted to bring up one last really quick point, because Preeti from our audience had brought it up earlier. She was talking about festivals and the color run, how rebranded Holi into the color run.
Can I just say,
Please.
okay, so this year, and I posted about this, Varun, I think you commented on it too. I posted on my Instagram. I think Kundan also commented on it as well. So on IG, you know, like how they market you with all the stuff that you're interested in, blah, 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 algorithm. Now there's mithais are being appropriated, you guys. Like I made a funny post, but it was not funny at all. Where it's like Diwali now is becoming like cultural, like it's becoming again another cultural appropriation thing. Again, another thing. So Color Run, yes, Color Run is like what, almost a decade old now, I think.
Yeah.
It's
Even
been in the
Diwali,
running.
they're wanting to celebrate it without any of the things, you know, about Diwali, without the Ram or any of those things. Or
Yes,
the
the actual essence, the essence of what it is.
It's like capitalizing it, right? Just finding a way to make $1 off of another holiday.
It's partly that, but it's also a lot like when universities do it, and I do know a lot of universities are doing it. I'm not going to name like one of them, but when they do it, it's a lot of like Indian students in those organizations who are choosing to make those decisions, but they're choosing it to be more inclusive towards their South Asian friends so that they don't feel left out. But I'm like, bro, like there's a reason why India has 20 different festivals. It's because we don't leave people out, and that we have government holidays on those festivals. Like we have Guru Nanak Jayanti, we have like multiple Ramzan holidays, we have Diwali, we have like Paryushan. So we have all of these things to be inclusive. So by erasing that, you're erasing our diversity and what makes us, you know, who we are, to just sound to be more inclusive. It's like a really poor attempt to be more liberal while erasing your own identity without realizing that that's what you're doing.
And I will say for the industry that I represent today here, which is the yoga and wellness industry and Ayurveda, I also hold that industry kind of accountable for allowance of all of this. You know, I think there's the whole goddess culture, right? I don't know if you guys have heard about the goddess culture that is happening in LA, and it's happening all around the world now, where it's like people are making decks out of like Lakshmi Devi Ji and, you know, Saraswati Devi Ji and whatever. And it's again coming back to that consumerism, again coming back to whiteness with the Y, you know, all of that, again, pointing us right back into decolonization of our mindset, pointing us right back into decolonial healing of ourselves as well. Because it's, you know, I'm seeing that yoga teachers, the way that they're paid and not paid, again, Ayurvedic doctors, which there are very few of here in America because of the way the red tape is in America. The way doctors are allowed to practice in the United States versus what you can do in India. And as Vivek said, there are also a lot of fake Ayurvedic doctors in India as well. So I understand why Indian people don't always trust Ayurveda. I also understand that perspective. But it's also the survival mechanism. I think people are trying to make it, those who are in the yoga industry, in the Ayurvedic industry, wellness industry, they're trying to basically take these pieces and make it digestible for their audience or their, you know, I will say clients, you know, because your students are your clients. They are your consumers in a way. And so this is perhaps not part of today's conversation because it's such a rich and big topic, and it's such a big broad topic, but it's also how we are consuming Ayurveda, how we are consuming yoga, and it goes right back into the festivals and all of that. So I'm seeing now, you know, people make posts about what Diwali means and blah 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 blah, and it's like, again, this intellectualized versions of our culture being presented, and thus giving a permission to appropriate what is so sacred.
Very true. There's a comment from Kundan. I kind of want to read that out. There's a famous example is Doreen Virtue, who appropriates our culture so much, but then found Jesus and denounced everything she did and started calling it all demonic, including Hinduism. They really only know how to use us or demonize us. They don't know how to have actual relationships with us. Wow, that's a great example.
I've seen that. I've also seen like the exact opposite. There's an author by the name of Francis Gauteur, like a French author who came to
The
India to like study
meditation,
these
the
things.
meditator, right? The French meditator.
I don't know if he meditates that much. I do know he talks a lot about like parallels between French culture, being raised as a Christian and then liking Indian spirituality so much that he actually started looking out the source of the spirituality, like not removed from it, and then ended up converting to Hinduism. Like, and he's a very strong supporter of it, and he calls out a spade for a spade. Like when someone like removes Hindu identity, like takes credit for it, but at the same time like continue to demonize us. He's a very active and vocal speaker about it now. Again, similar stories of 3 or 4 such people, and because again they're white, they're very popular on Twitter and these places, because they do have a lot of Indian following. We just like to say that we have someone else who came to our country to do something else, and they liked it so much that they were able to be inspired by it. On the other hand, we do have a lot of other people who only come to continue exploitation, whether it was the Sentinel Islands and the guy who wanted to like convert a tribe who hasn't seen civilization and then was eaten by them, or just any of the other things.
And there's also Dr. David Crowley, who is a very, an ardent supporter of Hinduism and kind of stands up for.
Yeah. Him as well.
Dr.
He was
Crowley.
Yeah.
It's
He
Dr.
shares
Crowley,
with Sadhguru and with the top kind of Indian historians, even sharing his perspective on
Rajiv Malhotra, that Deepika just shared. Yeah. Like I saw his talk, Rajiv Malhotra's talk, on how in Stanford and Harvard, like you see, like it was with like an alumni of Stanford or Harvard, I don't remember which one, but he was just talking about Hindophobia in American campuses, about like how our identities are erased, how, the second when the swastika is brought up, we aren't even given the choice to talk about it, talk about how it's not the same as the Hacking Cross, which was the symbol from which they like took and then just bastardized it. So again, really good conversations that he's had with them. And then you hear things that, you have seen before, but some other people just experience it on a different scale altogether.
There's something that Kundan said that really stuck with me, which is they don't know how to have actual relationship with us. And I think this is again going back to that inclusivity that is inherently in our way of being, I think, as Desis, and I will keep it at that because I don't want to speak for the entire South Asian diaspora. But I will say that it's not that they don't know how to have an actual relationship with us. I think often the problem is also we don't know how to have a relationship with each other. And so I'm saying this because one of the topics that I'm really interested in learning more about for myself is this inter-racism that happens even in South Asian cultures. And so I'll use Kundan as an example. Like Kundan is from Myanmar. The way that they celebrate Diwali, like I actually had to ask him, I was like, Kundan, I only know very little about like Burma. I've been there, I've spent time there, love it, love the people, love the food, love the culture, love everything. But it's even some of the contention that exists amongst us, and Vivek talked about that, the Dravidian versus the Aryan and how that propelled history and, the way that things exist now. I mean, who's that guy that wrote Two States, like a romantic novel which turned into movie? I mean, something like that. You also see the impacts of that also in society. And so it's, I think one of the ways that we really do continue to preserve what has been preserved and has been given down to us is I think we also teach by including others into our culture. And teaching them, part of that, I think, is teaching them how to have that relationship with us. And sometimes you do have to draw a hard line. Like I've had to draw a hard line for my friends, but like you speaking, even in a joking manner, about what you think the Indian accent is not appropriate.
Yeah.
It is not appropriate. I understand that it's fun and games, and I'm okay with it, but I'm okay with it to a certain degree. And actually, you know what? I represent a whole lot of people and I don't know what they feel. I don't know what those individuals feel. So it's not okay with me because I don't know how my brothers and sisters that I represent just by being who I am feel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think
very
that
true.
boundaries really have to be drawn by us, you know, as we also explore our own boundaries of like, how do I feel about that? And I actually don't, I'm okay. I'm totally okay joking around with other desis in, you know, whatever. I also do code switching that happens naturally because I have a very hyphenated realities that I live in, both US and in India. And so it just happens automatically. But people don't mind it. They understand the genuine, you know, it comes genuinely. It's not like I'm trying to fake an accent of like what in, you know, what people in Delhi speak like versus what people in, you know, Mysore speak like, or what people in Mumbai speak like, right? It's very distinct and it happens naturally over time. But I think these boundaries are really important in teaching how to cultivate that relationship. And I think the more that we do that, the more, you know, it takes time. It's going to take time. That is one of the ways that we sort of begin to reclaim our own identities, and we say like, no, actually it's not okay, this holy thing is not okay. There's somebody named Sahara Rose, I'm not trying to plug her, but again, same type of thing, appropriating of yoga and Ayurveda, and it's
Or like
like,
a
this is not
chapal with
okay.
the images of Lakshmi, or that idols in Vegas when we saw this and we saw the whole protest and furor over it.
Yeah, and there was even like a account that does, you know, Hindu deities artwork and stuff, and they recently posted out, they're like, should we do this on apparel? And I reached out and they were like, you know, we really want your opinion. And not me, but they said it on their story. So I reached out and I said, you know, I can't speak for everybody, but I'm saying that I'm not cool with this because I understand you're doing it as an art, but the minute you do it, now you're giving permission to other people to do it. You're automatically creating this permission that says, and I don't know, do you guys remember in the 90s when Abercrombie and Fitch put Ganeshji's face on chappals, on flip-flops? So that happened in the late 90s. And I remember it was like such a big deal because it was such a big deal.
Yeah.
It's like, I understand you don't mind the face of Jesus being wherever, like cool, but we have a boundary as a culture.
Yeah, and it's up to us to
Yeah,
uphold.
or the whole like
Yes, and so
highly
therefore it is
clothed
up to us to
Kali.
speak up. Yeah.
Nick, what were you saying?
I was saying the whole like controversy about like Heidi Klum as Kali during her Halloween party and any all of those things. There's like appreciation and there's appropriation. And the difference between them, you do it the right way. You know, you're wearing like an Indian dress during a prom. You know, this not appropriation. You know, again, depends on what your intention is, what you're doing with it, and how respectful you are. It's on us because I think we've been in survival mode for so long and vying for approval from a lot of these places because of like decades of constant deprivation and denial of our own existence, that we stopped remembering, or we don't even know that we can say no to things, or we can say that no, this is enough, like I'm calling this out, that I don't tolerate this, and that's not wrong. Like there's a difference in between being inclusive and open to exploration, whether it's arts and all of those things, and then being offended. There's nothing wrong with being offended when something deems taking offense over. We can't always bow down and let just take it, because again, that's what we've been doing for centuries now.
Non-violence.
Yeah. And the other ways, I see this a lot, Varun, sorry, it's like all coming to me. I don't know if it's the sun came out and my brain just got lit up all of a sudden. But it's also like some of the things that I'm seeing in Ayurveda and yoga for years, okay? Like years. I mean, my first yoga teacher outside of my grandfather teaching me in America, my first yoga teacher was a white man and a white woman. That was my first yoga teacher in America. And again, and there's nothing wrong with it. They were actually completely dedicated. It was like not a studio. It was somebody's home. We would get together every morning or in the evening, and there'd be like 5 or 6 people in his or her living room. And I was learning yoga through that way. And you could tell when you walk in, you could tell the appreciation. I'm digressing. What I originally wanted to say from this is that one of the ways that Ayurveda and yoga is being appropriated and not appreciated, and there is a distinct difference between the two. There is a very distinct difference between the two, is that you're taking things like pranayama or certain functions that help with relieving, let's say, sciatic pain or whatever. You're taking tools and techniques and you are repackaging it, you're relabeling it, you're creating with your own name or labeling it as something else. And then you're selling it, which means you're profiting it monetarily and otherwise. And then this is the appropriating part. You've already appropriated by taking something and relabeling, repackaging, repurposing, and all of that. Now you are not giving credit to the original source.
Right.
Maybe a book you read, maybe a teacher that you learned from. And this is where I get really, really upset, because it's like one of the most beautiful aspects of these practices is the respect, the reverence that we have for our teachers. And that gets appropriated. And that's like where I'm like, okay, hold up. Let me pull up my sleeves.
Yeah, that was a very fascinating conversation that we had. We did a episode with Kundan on yoga appropriation, and he had brought that up as well, where that respect and that reverence is also being appropriated. It's a fascinating conversation, and unfortunately, our 2 hours is up. We've gone past it. Just time flew by. We're having so much fun discussing this topic, and we just didn't know where time flew by. So at this point, I want to thank the panelists, Deepika and Vivek, for sharing the stories and engaging us in this discussion. I want to thank our audience for your questions, for your participation. This video we've gone live on YouTube, so if anyone's interested, I will send that link out to everybody. If you guys have comments, please send me them about these conversations. And if there are any other topics that you'd like to add, please let me know. I definitely would love to discuss those. Our next conversation, like I mentioned earlier, is on December 17th, 2 weeks from today. And that's on the topic of giving. We will be live on Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom. Again, everybody in the audience, thank you so much. Please go to my YouTube channel, subscribe, turn on notifications. That's all from my side and from our panelists. Love and abundance, everybody. And I hope you all have a fantastic day. Thank you, panelists. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
session.
Thank you.
Grateful for this
Goodbye.
conversation.
Yeah, y'all have a fantastic day, fantastic night, Vivek. And
Thank you.
we'll talk very soon.
Okay,
Thank
nice
you.
to meet you too, Deepika. Varun, goodbye.
Same here. Keep in touch.